Just eat in the bathroom. This suits you best. These words from my daughter-in-law and my son made me furious. I couldn't forgive the two of them for neglecting my dear father. Just you wait. What's going on? The usual. Huh? I can no longer overlook the actions of my son and daughter-in-law. I've decided to fight back. My name is Miranda Sarr, 60 years old. My family includes my 80-year-old father and my 40-year-old son, Daniel. Originally, Daniel lived with me and my husband. However, after my father became a widower, he started living alone. Thinking he would be lonely by himself, it was decided that Daniel would live with him. I'm thrilled because this house is also the home where I spent my childhood. My current home is a bit far from my father's place. That's why I was a bit troubled about not being able to visit my father often. I'm grateful to Daniel for willingly moving in to live with him. Grandpa is worried, and I wanted to try moving out once. Daniel had never left our home since he was born. He went to college from home and probably longed for a life of independence away from his parents. Thank you, take care of Grandpa. I decided to entrust my father to my son. At this time, Daniel was 40 years old. He was still single, without a wife. Hoping he would find someone good, my wish was soon to be granted. About 6 months after Daniel started living with my father at home, he suddenly contacted me. What's up? Actually, I'm gonna get married. Married? I was surprised by my son's sudden confession. There was no sign of a girlfriend, and it was shocking that he was getting married so suddenly. When did you get a girlfriend? I started living with Grandpa and pretty soon after, I had an arranged meeting, and she's really a great person. I felt relieved at the word great person. My son would be all right now. Then the day of the meeting came. My husband, Mike, and I attended the meeting. Nice to meet you. I greeted Angela, who would become my daughter-in-law. Hello, I'm Daniel's father. My husband followed with his greeting. The daughter-in-law had black hair, was tall with a good figure, and had distinctive, sharp eyes. I thought she was beautiful. However, after seeing her actions later, my impression of her changed drastically. So these are Daniel's mom and dad. The daughter-in-law looked us up and down. It felt awkward being stared at by someone I had just met. What's the matter? I asked the daughter-in-law. Then she answered. What, you don't look like your mother at all. Me and my mom? No, not at all. Indeed, my son and I don't look alike. He probably resembles my husband more. I was aware of it myself. However, I never imagined being told such a thing by my daughter-in-law, whom I had just met. The daughter-in-law continued. Grandpa is here too, right? We're gonna live together. What? Just the two of us, right? It seemed that my daughter-in-law, Angela, was unaware that the father and son were living together. I had assumed they had talked about it. What a hassle! Suddenly, Angela threw a tantrum. She looked just like a child. Angela is, in fact, the same age as my son, Daniel, both 40. She doesn't look her age at all. I thought I was gonna live with just Daniel. My son was also shaken by her behavior. My husband, Mike, was just as surprised by Angela's outburst next to him. But, he must have chosen her for a reason. Even though she was throwing a fit, my son looked at Angela with kind eyes. Then he calmed her down. It's okay, I'll take care of Grandpa. Really? I won't make it hard on you, Angela. Then, I understand. It seemed Angela was convinced by my son's words. But after that display of temper, I was at a loss for words. It was as if we were invisible to her, or perhaps she was choosing to ignore our presence. Either way, it seemed like she only had eyes for my son. In a way, that's sweet, but as the future mother-in-law, I'm filled with anxiety. Can we get along with her down the road? The first impression was so strong that I already felt uneasy around my new daughter-in-law, even though we had just met. Later, when I talked to my husband, it turned out he felt the same way. Are we going to be okay? I'm worried too. The problem isn't just my relationship with my daughter-in-law, Angela. I was also worried about her living with my father. Clearly, Angela was not thrilled about living with him. It's understandable, but even though my son, Daniel, said he would take care of my father, I was anxious Angela might be cold towards him. After all, during the initial meeting, she barely spoke to me and was somewhat standoffish even when we did talk. She was the same towards my husband, Mike. I'm worried about my father the most. I didn't visit often before, but now I've decided to check on him regularly. I decided it. There was no word from my son and Angela for a month after they got married. I thought Daniel would contact me if there were any problems, but there hasn't been any. I took it as a good sign and decided to leave them be. Above all, I was avoiding any interaction with Angela. Then one day, Daniel and Angela suddenly came back home. Angela looked visibly upset. I asked what happened. That grandpa is unbelievable. Angela was angry with my father. She said my father had stormed into her room when she was on the phone loudly with her friends, late into the night. But when I heard the time, it was after 2 a.m. A time when most people would be asleep. I couldn't help but sympathize with my father. I said I didn't want anything to do with that old man, didn't I? Angela was angry, not with Daniel, but with me. I didn't understand why I was being yelled at. It was Daniel's decision to live together, and I didn't order them to do so. Angela was completely lashing out at me. I just wanted to live quietly with Daniel. Why does it have to be like this? Well, you don't even care to check on your own parent. That last remark really stung. After giving me a piece of her mind, Angela seemed satisfied and left. Are you okay? My husband, Mike, who had witnessed the whole exchange with Angela, asked me with concern. Yeah. She seems like a difficult person. If you ever have any trouble, just tell me, okay? Mike spoke kindly. Thank you. I'm almost 60 years old, and this was the first time I've been so harshly criticized by someone younger than me. Of course, I've apologized for my mistakes at work before. But Angela's way of blaming was clearly unreasonable. And it's not the way to express anger towards a mother-in-law. I understand that as her daughter, I should be the one looking after my father. However, he insists on staying in that house. The house filled with memories of my mother and me. My father is still capable of taking care of himself, and forcibly moving him wouldn't be right. It was a decision I made after much thought. And my son, Daniel, agreed to live with him. So, I didn't think Angela, who married into the family, had any right to criticize that decision. This incident made me even less inclined to talk to Angela. But avoiding her proved difficult. Hey, is old woman here? Angela suddenly came to visit our house. This time, Daniel wasn't with her. It was the first time Angela had come alone. What could it be? And was she referring to me as old woman? Her refusal to even call me mother-in-law only infuriated me more. I was amazed at Angela's lack of manners. What's up? I reluctantly went outside. As soon as Angela saw my face, she looked displeased. So, it's old woman. It turns out she was indeed referring to me as old woman. And then she started yelling at me out of nowhere. It's really all your fault, you know? My fault? Yeah, I thought I was going to live with Daniel, but why do I have to live with Grandpa? She still seemed to hold a grudge about that. I asked my daughter-in-law, Angela. Isn't Daniel taking care of his grandpa? My son had said he would take care of him. But Angela's response was different. He's not looking after him at all, leaving everything to me. Our newlywed life is ruined. She glared at me. It's all your fault. Then she left without waiting for my reply. I had planned to explain to Angela that my father wanted to live in his home, but it seemed like it would be futile now. Angela wasn't willing to listen to anyone. Whatever I said, she would just push back. This incident made me want to have even less to do with Angela. But what she said about my son not taking care of my father worried me. One day, worried about my father, I decided to go home after a long time. Even though he can take care of himself, I was concerned if my son wasn't actually looking after him. It had been 2 years since my son and Angela got married. By that time, they had a child, who was my grandchild. I decided to go home during the Christmas holidays for a first meeting with my grandchild. I was thrilled as it was my first grandchild. But I suspected that my son and Angela were probably too busy with the baby. I couldn't forgive Angela for treating the father who raised us as a nuisance. Finally, the day came, and I went home. It was my first visit in 6 months. I'm home. When I returned, Angela made an obviously displeased face. I've gotten used to this by now, so it didn't bother me much. Angela's attitude is unlikely to change. Then, I went straight to my father's room. What? The place that used to be my father's room had been turned into a children's room. Had it been given up for my grandchild? And when I came out of the room, I found my father in the yard.
What are you doing out here?
I asked. I wondered why he was sleeping in the yard in such cold weather. Then, suddenly, Angela came out with some food.
Here's your food for today, eat it in the bathroom like always. Bathroom?
I was shocked by Angela's words. Why was my father eating his meals in the bathroom? It's always like this. My father answered.
What?
Angela always treated my father terribly. She made him eat his meals in the bathroom and sleep outside. It was as if he wasn't considered a human being. And I was getting angry at my son for not saying anything. If this was the usual, it meant my son was also treating my father terribly. Unforgivable. I decided to fight back against my son and Angela. I went to convince my father.
Won't you live with us in our house?
However, my father shook his head.
This house has too many memories.
It was the answer I expected, but if I didn't persuade him now, my father would continue to be mistreated by my son and his wife. We didn't know what they might do to him next.
It's not good for you to stay here anymore. Let's live together.
But
I would never make you feel this way. Let's live in our house.
It took some time, but I finally managed to convince my father. I felt sorry for my father, but this was the only way to fight back against my son. And so, my father came to live in my house. My husband, Mike, was happy to accept him.
I hope your father can find some relaxation in our home. Thank you so much.
I was truly grateful for my husband's kindness. When I told my son and Angela that my father had moved in with us, their reaction was just, "Oh, is that so?" Angela must be relieved. I imagined, and the thought made me furious. And now, the real fight back against my son and his wife began. One day, after my son had been visiting Angela's parents for nearly 2 weeks, he came back to find the house had been demolished.
What happened all of a sudden?
It was understandable for my son to be confused. After all, the house he lived in was suddenly turned into an empty lot. I called my son to our house.
Why did you suddenly call me?
My son was angry. But it was necessary to tell him the truth. Hearing what had happened, my son got even angrier. How could you just demolish the house like that? Well, you didn't need it, right?
Why does Grandpa have to come up in this? I didn't want the house filled with memories to be taken over by you and your wife.
I spoke sharply. I thought it was important not to show any hesitation.
Are you neglecting your grandpa?
I asked my son. Just then, the house's doorbell rang. Honestly, having visitors at this time was inconvenient. But to my surprise, it was Angela who had come.
What are you doing here?
I said to Angela coldly. I thought there was no need to be kind to someone who treated my dear father so badly.
My son is nowhere to be seen, and then I realized the house has been turned into an empty lot. What's going on?
My mom did it. My son told Angela.
What? The old woman did?
To Angela, I was still just the old woman. It seemed she never really saw me as her mother-in-law. Yes, I did it. I admitted frankly. I didn't think I had done anything wrong, and after all, it was my father and I who had been mistreated.
Why would you do something like this? Our house is gone now.
Angela was furious. Thinking about dealing with this indefinitely was troublesome, so I explained why I had the house demolished.
That house is where I spent my childhood, full of memories. My father always said he didn't want to leave it. Who cares what Grandpa thinks?
Angela's response made it clear. She only thought about herself. But I couldn't afford to lose here.
But, you see, the woman who married Daniel was very mean, calling her mother-in-law the old woman and bullying me.
Mom.
Such a person, I don't consider family, and I thought they didn't belong in that house. So, I had it demolished while you were visiting your parents.
Oh no. I told my son firmly.
You promised to take proper care of him, but it seems you've done something terrible.
I could sue you, you know. The word sue seemed to shock my son.
Please don't do that! Stories of sons and their wives mistreating an elderly father are all too common in the news, aren't they? Please stop, mother-in-law.
I couldn't help but laugh. The daughter-in-law who had always called me old woman was finally starting to respect me as a mother-in-law. You finally call me mother-in-law when you find yourself in a crisis. My smile was met with my son's grimace.
I'll do anything if you drop the lawsuit,
Angela said, trembling. Then, can you promise never to come near this house again? What? To me and to my father. And preferably, I don't want you near my grandchild either. I don't think a child raised by someone like you would turn out well. Angela apologized to me. I don't want to be separated from my child. Of course, it's natural for a mother not to want to be separated from her child. But I no longer had any sympathy for Angela. Ignoring her plea, I continued. The pain you're feeling now is what I've endured all this time. Angela seemed taken aback by my words. Maybe she finally realized. And then, I said to my son, Daniel, do you really want to continue your married life with this person? I looked down on my son, who had been silent until now. Being with such a mean-spirited daughter-in-law, I wondered if my son was really okay. Daniel, am I to understand you're just like your wife, mistreating your grandpa? No, I'm not. My son suddenly denied my murmuring. What did he mean? I was always being ordered around. What do you mean? Make grandpa eat his meals in the bathroom, and try not to let him into the house as much as possible. I see, that was what it was. I glared at my son. I was threatened that all my money would be taken if I didn't obey.
What are you saying, Daniel?
Angela countered. How could this be? I sighed deeply. I was utterly appalled by my daughter-in-law. Didn't Angela love my son? Was that why she tried to separate him from his father? It's obvious I don't love him. What? Angela murmured. Daniel was single until 40 and had a lot of money, so I married him for that. If it wasn't for the money, I wouldn't need Daniel. You married Daniel for that reason? Angela responded to my question. Yes. What was she saying? You're kidding.
You approached my son for such a reason?
Unbelievable. I couldn't contain my anger at Angela's utterly unreasonable reason. This might have been the first time I raised my voice so much. Not only my father, but also my son had been threatened. I could no longer see my daughter-in-law as a person after she insulted my family like this. If things continued this way, she might do something terrible to my husband too. I will never allow anyone to make my family suffer any longer. It's unfortunate, but this is goodbye. I placed the luggage Angela had brought outside and escorted her to the entrance.
Never come near my precious family again.
How could you? After pushing Angela outside, I closed the front door.
Please open up.
I heard Angela knocking on the door multiple times, but I ignored it. Eventually, when the knocking stopped, I knew she had given up and left. My son was standing there dumbfounded, showing no signs of chasing after Angela. He must have been seriously threatened. It's natural he would want to distance himself. I finally feel relieved. I was able to say everything I had been holding back, feeling truly relieved. It had been for the first time in a long while. Maybe my heart hadn't been at peace since Angela joined our family. The constant stress and nerve-wearing may have taken its toll on me. But, I think I managed to fight back adequately for all the bullying we endured. Peace has finally returned to our home. My son and Angela eventually got a divorce. Angela was initially against it, but my son had no intention of reconciling. Given the daily threats, it was natural. My grandson, born between them, would be raised by my son. I believe it was the right choice. If the marriage with Angela had continued, my father would have suffered even more. And my son might have been bullied even more by Angela.
I'm sorry for everything.
My son apologized to me. Even though he was ordered around by Angela, it was a fact he had bullied his grandfather. It was pitiful. However, I couldn't bring myself to let my son off the hook like that. I had trusted him to take care of my father. If something had happened, it would have been nice if my son had consulted me, but he followed his wife's lead without discussing anything with me. Of course, living together again would likely be impossible. From now on, please live with your child. I no longer want my son to return home, but to become independent. Having lived at home until the age of 40 might have made him a bit spoiled. That's why I want my son to gain the strength to live on his own and the ability to raise his child as a parent. My son is not just any adult, he is a respectable parent of a child. As his parent, I hoped he would fulfill his responsibilities as a parent. I understand. With that, my son took his child and left the house. This was for the best. I reassured myself. And with everything resolved, I felt a great sense of relief. My father adjusted very quickly to living in my house. And he seemed more at peace than when he was at the previous house. Seeing my father's smile return made me very happy. No matter which house we live in, as long as we have family, we are happy. Seeing my father say this made me truly relieved. I'm glad we could live together. I hope we can continue to live peacefully and closely as a family.